It is not by chance that you are here today. You are looking for something larger than yourself and wanting a place of belonging and caring. You sought a beloved community, a community that holds its arms open to the possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and share your gifts. Welcome home. Welcome to worship.
We'll now have our prelude music.
Wait, this is start. This is the intro, right? Ready?
Here.
Sing. This is the light of mine. I will let it shine. This is the light of mine. I will let it shine. This is the light of mine. I will let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. All around the world. All around the world. I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world. I'm gonna let it shine. All around the world. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. One last time. This is the light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
Nice.
Good morning. Welcome, members, friends, and visitors to the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, where we seek to inspire, inform, and support all who seek spiritual growth and a more equal and just community. I'm Nancy Holland, as Sue has already said, service leader working with Sue today. And also, as she noted, we're mostly Zoom, we're mostly live, but we do have some pre-recorded segments of stories, pictures, and music. And I want to thank our tech team, David Beeler, Bill Browning, Jim Lavin, and John Ramsey for all their assistance with this service today. We're also going to kick off our stewardship campaign today, and you'll hear more from Jim Lavin about that later in our service. And as we do that, we're going to take the time to celebrate our congregation's story and take a little stroll down memory lane. This sort of tour will be followed by a slideshow and some thoughts on our story from Reverend Sue. And now, please join Pat Bjorky in the chalice lighting.
When UUCR was in its 8th or 9th year, we found ourselves in a place of great exhaustion. The congregation had not grown enough to ensure a healthy progression of leadership. The dream of a home of our own seemed ever out of reach. We were tired and burned out. We began talking about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, UUCR had run its course and perhaps it was time to close our doors. Our minister, Reverend Alex Richardson, helped us explore options, including the concept of taking a congregational sabbatical to allow us time to renew and re-energize our faith rather than outright closing. As a symbol of our commitment, he suggested we could transfer our chalice to the UU congregation in Easton so that they could safeguard our flame until we could light it once again. In the end, we decided to push through. One more week, one more month, one more year, until we emerged on the other side of that exhaustion. What kept us going was the connections we found in beloved community, and each week lighting our chalice with these familiar words. We light this chalice as a symbol of the light within all creation. We light this chalice for truth. May the search for truth be with us always. We light this chalice for love. May the love for others be strong in our hearts.
Thank you, Pat. I think, Jim, you can spotlight me now for just a second.
Yeah, I'm gonna find you again. Sorry.
Take your time.
There you go.
So I light the chalice now with those familiar words and with the blessings for Pat, who was one of the founding members of this congregation. The parts of our service today are going to be pretty untraditional, but we thought we would start with something traditional, a familiar hymn, Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. If you happen to have a hymnal, it's number 34.
As we look back on our congregation's story thus far, it's clear that it's shared values that have brought us together. And as Pat just noted, it's the sense of community and commitment that has kept us going. But a church is also a building, a place, a structure within a community. It is its people, and also its objects and articles, its artifacts of its history. With the help of Jim Lavin and his camera, we're going to take a move through our church building this morning and recall some of the events, people, and objects that have a place in our history. So every faith, tradition, and organization has its creation story. And as we celebrate ours here today, I'd like to share with you some of the stories and some of the people that have been important in our history. Many of you already know the story of the famous phone call between founders Pat Bjorky and Leslie Roach back in 1991. They got in touch with each other looking for a liberal faith tradition in which to raise their children, and they found nothing here in Kent County. But they'd heard about Unitarian Universalism. So reaching out to Reverend Dan Higgins, a UU minister in Easton, Maryland, they were put in touch with Mariana and Steve Hitchner and Washington College professor Dr. Peter Tapke, who also became founding members of our congregation. A public forum was held in 1992 with good response, which led them to move forward with forming a congregation which held its first formal service at the Friends Meeting House in September of 1992. And in June of 1993, the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River were formally accepted as a congregation by the Unitarian Universalist Association. You know, there's a lot of us in this building. When it was first built, members painted the interior. And then in 2012, a small group built the deck on the back of our building for our morning coffee hours under the guidance of John Leake, who then became a friend of our community. We often do grounds cleanups every spring, where we all come out and try to keep our property up to shape, weeding, pruning, mulching, and enjoying the donuts that Jim Lavin always brings. We've had a lot of good times in this building and elsewhere, from potlucks to auction night festivities, Earth Day celebrations, blessings of the animals, and our solstice services, which are usually held at friends' homes. These celebrations always bring us together in our sense of community, good conversation, and always there's good food. And it's nice to know that people have an interest in this church. And sometimes I think it's easy for us older members to forget the legacy and the history and forget to pass it on to some of our newer members. One of the things I love here is the quilt, our chalice quilt. This was made by members of the congregation, several different women who designed and sewed their individual squares, and then Sue Thompson, a member who has since moved away, put it all together for us. And it was a gift to our church when we first moved in here. We have other things too that are memorable for us. The late Tom Kerr made our lectern here and a bench in the lobby as a gift to our church. He was the husband of our own Betty Kerr, a great rug hooker who made a piece that is also in the lobby, and I'll show you later. This building actually couldn't have been built without the help of Dr. Peter Tapke. Dr. Tapke was the first president of our congregation, and when he passed away, he left a very substantial bequest to UUCR. In 2000, we used that bequest, part of it, to purchase this land here in Crestview, and then to move ahead with building our own church home. We broke ground in 2005 and moved into this space in November of 2006. Another wonderful bequest from a member, Lois Ward, allowed us to purchase our piano. It's a beautiful piano and has a wonderful tone, and we are so happy and blessed to have that. And we also have our chalice, a main symbol of Unitarian Universalists and the flame. And that was a gift from Susan and John LaFurla, who purchased it for their wedding at the Unitarian Church and then gifted it to us. These are just a few of the meaningful objects that we have in our possession. You can see we've moved to the foyer and that we've also moved some things around this morning due to the bright sunlight, which is causing a lot of glare for our filming. But there are two important things I wanted to discuss or talk about this morning in terms of milestones for our congregation. One is our Green Sanctuary certification. We achieved this in 2007 under the leadership of Carl Gallegos and others who worked hard to achieve this. And then with Linda Dutton at the helm and another hardy group of workers, the whole congregation went through the process of becoming a certified LGBTQ welcoming congregation. We're very proud of both these designations, and we have many members in our congregation who continue to work vigorously on both these behalfs. And also, here is the bench that I referenced before that Tom Kerr had built for us, and his wife Betty, our member, hooked the beautiful floral runner that you see here. I hope when we all get back to normal church services that you'll notice the peace pole out front. That was installed in memory of our devoted member and benefactor, the late Ann Hennessy. A peace pole is a multi-sided obelisk with the words, "May peace prevail on earth," in languages from around the world. And they're quite popular at Unitarian Universalist churches and serve as a reminder for us about our commitment to peace for all. It was a perfect way to honor Anne, who was a determined social advocate for justice. She was the guiding light for UUCR in joining the Chester Valley Ministers Association, and she always spearheaded the Martin Luther King breakfast. And yes, social justice work is still key for us today, and I think Anne would be delighted and proud of our congregation. Our most recent strategic plan calls for us to be more active in our external community, and particularly in the areas of social and racial justice. Many of our congregation are really getting involved in many different ways. We're educating ourselves, attending racial justice trainings, helping to paint the Black Lives Matter sign downtown, working with Sumner Hall and the Lynching Project, and most recently, helping to furnish a house for a family of 5 in conjunction with Kent Attainable Housing. Lynn Dolinger and her social justice team are really keeping us on the move. I could keep going, but there is another story that is really meaningful to our congregation. Would you share that with us?
How many of us identify our church with the octagonal stained glass window that rests high on our sanctuary wall? From the outside, it looks like, or it identifies us rather, as Unitarian Universalist. But from the inside, with the sun shining through, it shows the beauty and depth and love of our church. Every day I walk in, I'm amazed by its beauty. Well, how did it get here? Well, here's the story. When our church building was in the early stages, we had architectural drawings to look at. And we noticed in one of the drawings that there was an octagonal window drawn in the same place as the one that exists now. However, it was only a small window, about so big. Well, the building committee looked at it and said, that's too small. It provides minimal light. And as one of them said, it looked like something that should be in a hallway or a restroom. Well, obviously, we didn't want that as part of our church. Well, Annie, my wife, had a vision of what it should be like. And she approached John LaFarla, who was then the board chair, and me being the building chair, and said we should have a larger window, one as large as we can possibly get, and use that as a frame for a stained glass window, possibly showing a vision or a version of our chalice. Well, John and I were on board immediately, and after getting approval from the architect, we went searching for both the window and an artist who worked in stained glass. Well, we had a hard time finding a window, but once we did, and realizing it was hard to get, we decided, let's buy it now and have it ready. So we actually had a window before we had a church. So we looked around for a stained glass artist, and after looking at quite a few, we settled on a woman named Robin Abel. We had seen her work at the Chestertown Wildlife Festival some time ago, and saw what an expert she was in stained glass. So we called Robin and made an appointment, and a small group of us, and I can only remember Linda Dutton and Annie being there. I know there were others, and time has passed, and I forget who they were, so my apologies for not remembering who it was. Anyhow, we met with Robin and gave her our idea of what it should look like. And she immediately sat down and sketched out what she thought our feelings or our ideas were. And it was exactly what you see here today. And then and I can see she got very excited, and she's pulled out these pieces of stained glass and held them up to the sunlight, crimsons and blues and purples and I don't know. Somebody told me one of them was a fruit color. So I don't know what color fruit that was, but it was beautiful. And you see, she was excited, and she told us she had been saving these for a special project. Well, it turned out that special project was going to be us. What she developed and what you see up there today is a thing of beauty that's as beautiful today as it was then. And it's important to know that both Robin and her husband, Mike Oss, were good friends of UUCR. And this was the last creation she had done, or the last creation she did before her death. As we look at this stained glass window, I know as I come in every day and look at it, it gives me a warmth and a deep sense of gratitude. And I'm so happy we have it, and we appreciate what Robin did for us. When we built the memorial garden down toward the edge of our property, around the perimeter, we installed bricks, engraved bricks, with the names of those members and good friends who had passed. Robin Abel is part of that group.
We are now going to see a slideshow. It'll give you a sense of UUCR's history. If you don't see yourself in the first one, you'll probably see yourself in another one, and know that we have many pictures that didn't quite fit in. So gratitude to Dave Beeler for our slideshows today. We can now run the first one.
got a lot of shrubbery around it now that's gotten bigger.
Yeah, thank you. So we're gonna spotlight me, and if anybody's gone off mute, other than Nancy, we could probably go back on mute. So thank you, Nancy and Jim, for putting that story together. It's been almost 30 years since that 1991 phone call, and there are so many people in those pictures that I don't know who they are. Some folks may be able to name almost everyone, but that is how a continuing history of a congregation works. There are always a flow, an ebb and a flow of different folks coming through. So I looked on the UUCR's website. As a congregation, the congregation is great at documenting its history, and the latest write-up goes through 2014, which is pretty good. I want to remind folks that in 2014, David Newell would have still been your minister. He announced in 2014 that he was going to be leaving by June of 2015. And I think since then, the congregation has had many, many transitions. That story keeps changing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story from a newcomer's perspective, because once David left, in 2015, you had Reverend Christian Schmidt. He was here for a year, and then you went ministry free for a year. Congregations go through periods of discernment, and that following year, the 2016-17 church year, was a year of making some decisions. And one of your decisions was, would halftime ministry be a fit? And I know that Pat Bjorky was the president that year. There were jobs posted, and luckily for me, you said yes. And I arrived in September 2016. So one of the things we've heard a lot about the buildings, but I want to look at the story a little bit differently, because one of the very first things I found out is if you want to know about UUCR, you had to know about Margot. Margot, as far as I could tell, knew everything. She produced orders of service. She kept the books and the records. She issued the paychecks. Somebody else signed them, but she issued them and made sure that the phone calls and the day-to-day connections were made. And that's part of the legacy of the congregation, also of pastoral care, of your caring committees, that make sure that the humans, the relationships, are centered in all things. And it was for 15 years that Margot was this glue that held a lot together, in addition to all the other folks we're going to hear about. Margot was key. You would think she was irreplaceable, but then she decides to leave. And we were blessed by the amazing work of Jan Whitney for 2 years. And now the congregation with open arms is welcoming Darlene Wiggers. So the congregation is its building, its ministers, and its staff. And I think we sometimes tell the stories that way. We tell based on the things that are easier to track, the more visible parts. But I think we also need to tell the history of what has happened week after week, month after month for the congregation. So I want to add these little bits to the history of the congregation. UUCR has thrived since the beginning of its time on its speakers and programs on Sundays. And lay leader Annie Lavin, working with Nancy Holland, Vita Morley, and others who were part of this over the years and are currently part of the team, every week, different speakers have been brought in, and they are carefully collaborated with to create the experience of bonding, to stretch ourselves each Sunday. By my guess, there have probably been 1,400 or 1,500 services since this congregation, since that first phone call. So worship in its entirety is part of the history. Since its inception, UUCR has also had a focus on children and the ministry to children, something that's called religious exploration, which is not surprising. If a congregation is founded by moms who want religious exploration, that happens. And it's also really strikes me is if you go back to 1991 or 1993, however you want to count the beginning, it was really pre-internet, pre-cell phones, and the needs of families were a little bit different. So like all small congregations and small institutions, the religious education program has had times it was bigger and smaller, but under the guidance of many, and so particularly under the ministry of Pappy Yorkie, the children's needs and the children's ways of being transformed have been central. And though we're on a respite for right now, which is we've worked with the families and that's where we are, we're at a small place, post-pandemic, we'll see what religious exploration looks like. I think earlier Nancy mentioned the strategic plan. Under Dick Hawkins' leadership, Philippa Dutton was recruited to work with a team. They did the strategic plan, but it happened by them picking and asking questions, from asking everyone. And I was here by then to share from our hearts and our heads where we would go. And discernment is part of what a congregation does. Just remember that 6 years ago, none of this was really part of the history, or at least not parts that we were necessarily telling. There's all the rituals that Nancy mentioned, some of them. Eve of Eve really strikes me as one that's unique to UUCR, and all of the outreach. So all of those components come together, and that's the story. Well, the history now is going to include the disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic. Unlike so much of the above, where you heard the careful stories of planning, this is an unplanned part of the story. And stories are like that. Stories in our life come with the planned parts, and they come with the disruptions, the unplanned parts, the challenges, and the adaptations, in this case, that the congregation has made since March 2020. I've decided to go ahead and write my own paragraph into the history here. And I'm thinking by the time we get to the other side of this, we might write something like Reverend Sue Browning, working with the presidents of Chester River and Easton, proposed that the two congregations pool their resources and share worship services in this unprecedented situation. The tech and communications team working with worship have miraculously somehow ensured that services happened every Sunday until, and I don't know what that date is, but it's going to be something like that. We're all living part of the story of this congregation. It's been a challenging part, and it's going to be a part where we're going to talk, I don't know if it's, silver lining sounds a little light, but we're going to talk about the different way relationships were sustained and framed during this part, because histories continue, worship and all the different ways we gather for all of our ages continues. So now, a few more slides from the history of the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River. just take a moment. I think Jim's, have you spotlighted me? We good? So as a moment of reflection, I ask folks to consider all that you just thought, the shoulders that we stand on, to hold the bricks that hold the names of those who have loved the congregation and been loved by this congregation. Hold the meetings, the decisions, the discernment, and the laughter. Just take a minute and hold what you've just seen, a bit of a sliver, as we enter time for acknowledgements of the heart, another tradition where many candles have been lit and stones have been dropped. Hold that as we add to this week's acknowledgements of the heart. So our service will go a few more minutes. We're closing close to the end, but hang in there. We've got a few more stories for you. So earlier I skipped a little bit of the history, and it's both the foundation and it's the future of UUCR. I want to take a moment and lift up the leaders. We've talked about a lot of ways that people have sustained and led programs, but I want to specifically talk about the role of board president. I didn't get a chance to go by the church, but there is a plaque that shows the number of folks that have stepped up to the role as president of the congregation. And I know there are many that are actually on this call today. In a Unitarian Universalist congregation, the president is really where everything stops there. The minister is giving some spiritual guidance and doing their thing, but it is a role that holds accountability. It is the role not to do stuff on their own, but says we're going to be here next year and the year after that. It's the person I called. It was David Beeler I called when we had to decide to cancel service. It's the person I consult when we're trying to figure out how long do we stay in virtual services. And we talk to lots of other people, but it's that president who has that role of holding the bag. And how does one become president? What does it take? Probably a better question is, what does it take to become president? It takes, frankly, courage. It's not so much that it's hard. You have to do the tasks. You got to make sure that board meetings happen, and you've got to make sure that certain initiatives keep moving, maybe a little bit of leadership recruitment. But I don't think it's as much hard as it is scary, because that's the place where you're holding all this past and looking forward. So it's 2021, and as a gathered community, we have been for many years a place that folks seek out. We are a needed force in the broader community, both for those that have already found us, for those who haven't found us, but also for our voice in the world. When we look back at all those pictures, you're going to see a few more at the very end. We know that folks come and go, but there is this continuity. There's a way that folks come together and make sure we are continuing to widen the circle, to be a place of acceptance. We are a saving force that for those that are riding out challenges, for those that need to share a joy or sorrow. We are a voice ready to raise issues in the community, sometimes before others quite have that courage. I'm looking at the welcoming congregation signs and everything, stuff that happens way before. It's a place where we don't shy away. The president has to help us ask the hard questions to help us figure out how we're going to live into our values. So that is also an important part of the history as we go forward. Who had the courage to lead and step into those shoes? So what I hoped you've heard today, as you've heard the history, is not that it's some smooth, unwrinkled story, Pat Bjorky reminds us of a really tenuous spot. It wasn't about my favorite pictures. I had never seen the big, huge building being lowered smoothly into the spot. It's good to have those images, but that's not how community is formed. It's formed sometimes through the bumps, the challenges. It's never been easy. There probably are challenges and disagreements. There have been low points. But when you hear the story as a whole, you see the amazement, you see the wonder that's been created bits by bits, pledge by pledge, story by story. So from a phone call in 1991 to a community of connection during a pandemic using technology that was not even heard of back in 1991, UUCR is a place that matters. It matters as we keep the circle wide, as we extend love, as we listen for how love calls us. So now Jim is going to wrap us up. And one of the questions I asked Jim was, I've heard his story of how he first got here in different pieces, but what keeps you, Jim, still here in 2021? And how is the stewardship campaign going to work this year? Because that is our wrap up for today. So Jim, we can spotlight yourself. I'm not sure how that works. And you need to get yourself off mute.
Thank you, Joe. I just need a little help there. I go back and think of the phone call I received one day from Ann Morrison. Ann called me up, and I had just been going to the Union Church for a short period of time, and yeah, she called me, and talking after a few minutes, she said, "How would you like to be on the board?" And I said, "Well, I can't do that." I said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, I'm not a member." And it's a long pause, and she said, "Jim, would you like to become a member of the church?" This is before our current rules we have for being a member of a certain period of time before we can be on the board. Anyhow, she said, "Would you like to be a member?" I said, "Yeah, good. Then you can be on the board. Thank you." And she hung up. That's how I became a UU. But as most people, when you become a member, you say yes to being on many different committees. I said yes to being on the building committee when I built the church. I said yes to being on B&G. I was treasurer for a while in finance, and I did all of this because I thought I was helping the faith community, this faith community. But looking back, however, I realized that I was the one who's being helped. I was feeling part of a religious organization in a way that I hadn't experienced before. Caring for the church as a member of the B&G committee, as an example, has become almost a spiritual practice for which I'm grateful. I've found myself surrounded and immersed with some of the most interesting, loving, and caring people I've ever met. I really do mean that. I found that I could have the opportunity to explore my own beliefs while being supported by a loving and caring community. I never had that chance before because I always belonged to a creed-based religion. I was told what to believe. But now the religious world was open to me. That was a gift that I had never experienced before, and I truly, truly value. And I remember really becoming a solid UU one day when I was in church. I remember being there and looking around at all the congregants. By that time, I knew them pretty well. There were Catholics, there were Methodists, there was this Baptist from LA, from Louisiana, rather, you know who he is. Several Jews, there were agnostics, and even a confirmed atheist, all worshiping together as a community. I said to myself, then, this is where I really belong. For the first time in my life, I was enjoying, even looking forward to going to church on Sunday. And when I would leave the services, I would have the feeling of gratitude for the opportunity of worshiping the way I like. It's been almost a year now since we've had services in our sanctuary, but with the guidance of Reverend Sue and the excellent tech work of John Ramsey and David Beeler, for which I'm very grateful, our services have continued. And now I'm looking forward to our renewal of services in September, to go back to those wonderful days, those wonderful services rather, in our spiritual home. And that is a little segue into saying today is the kickoff of our fiscal year 2022 pledge drive. And you will note the budget we have together is based upon opening our services in the fall. So we'll be going back in the fall. There's a YouTube video that's on our website now that explains the budget and the pledge drive. And it's on our website, and you'll be shortly seeing a link that will also take you directly there if you're not familiar with how to access the videos on the website. So please review it and proceed then to make your church using the pledge form we've sent you in the mail. And if you haven't received one, please contact Darlene or me, and we'll get one to you. And oh, by the way, we'll be having a Zoom meeting on Thursday the 11th at 7 p.m. You'll get a link to that shortly to answer any questions you may have regarding the budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. I hope folks feel inspired. I hope folks understand we're part of something longer. I know I got my mailing, so gratitude to the whole stewardship team, and we'll hear more about that as we go forward. We are blessed in our final music today. Again, there's one more slideshow way at the end, but there's a song called Stand. And in 2016, the congregation used this around the same time, has permission to use this music. And as you reflect on what you've seen today, I think this music will help move us forward and help us remember to keep telling the history. Thank you.
I will stand with you. Will you stand with me? And we will be the change that we hope to see. In the name of love, in the name of peace. Will you stand with me? When injustice raises up its fist and fights to stop us in our tracks, we will rise, and as one resist, no fear nor sorrow can turn us back. I will stand with you, will you stand with me, and we will be the change that we hope to see. In the name of love, in the name of peace, will you stand with me? When pain and hatred turn up angry noise and fight to drown out our freedom song, we will rise in one joyful voice, loud and clear and ever strong. I will stand with you, will you stand with me, and we will be the change that we hope to see. In the name of love, in the name of peace, will you stand with
So our closing words today is a reminder that we close our service in gratitude. We close in gratitude for this congregation and the many ways we have lived out our values together. We close with the promise of continuation, the promise that this story will go on, and for the ways the congregation matters. Go in peace, go in love, go knowing love surrounds you wherever you may go. And we'll now spotlight Nancy for extinguishing the chalice.
We Wait.
Bill, I think we're a little early. Okay,
Oh, okay.
1 second. Nancy's going to extinguish the chalice, I
We
believe.
extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. And now the benediction.
Lifted up, love bless your way. Moonlight, starlight, guide your journey into peace and the brightness of day.
Thank you, Philip. And we're going to do most of our announcements, I think, during coffee hour. I'm aware of the time, but I just point everybody to the newsletter. There's lots of exciting things about stewardship, but if you have not read about the Great Cookie Giveaway, that's the motivation to go check the newsletter. The vaccine distribution folks would be excited by what has been planned by the team working on the Great Cookie Giveaway. So check your outreach collections, etc. So we're going to offer now the postlude. We will then go right into coffee hour. And if there's any final announcements folks want to give, great. It has been the perfect way to spend a snowy / rainy / crazy morning together, telling the stories of this congregation and remembering we all need to be able to tell them to others. So learn your little bits, add to the story, send in more photos. It is a special place. Take care of it well. Stewardship matters. Blessings. And now for our final slideshow. So go tech team. Yay. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, everybody can go to gallery view, and we are in coffee hour now. I'm gonna go get coffee.
Well, let me have a rule and a saw and a board and I'll cut it. I'll climb up a ladder with a hammer and a nail and I'll nail it. Well, we worked so hard to build a little house together. In the snow or the rain or the ice cold wind, whenever. No matter what the weather, we're together.